Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getItinwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is Roger Linn. He is an inventor and innovator, creator of the LM1, the Linn drum, the Linn sequencer, the Linn 9000, the Akai MPC series, the Adrenaline, and probably a whole bunch of other stuff that I've forgotten. Roger, thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
I want to start with a little bit of your early background, because I know that you come from a musician's background, and I'm always sort of fascinated about where the left brain right brain split happens in a person's career.
Well, yes, I was a working musician in Los Angeles. I did some touring, and I did some studio work. I wasn't one of the players that are in high demand. But I at least got a little bit of work because I was not only playing guitar, but I did some songwriting, I did some production, I did some engineering. I knew about synth programming, so you put it all together, and it made me less of a starving musician, even though I was still a starving musician. But at the same time, while I had the musical interest and knowledge, I also had an interest in technical things, and so I had an early computer, was writing software and learning about circuit design and things like that. So it was a natural marriage of those two interests to combine music and technology into creating technological musical instruments.
Well, especially at that particular time, because things were really kind of taking off with the advent of synthesis and whatnot. So you rode that in at just the right time. Did you have any formal technical training or anything like that?
No, I actually even have no college degrees. I
love it.
I just had a high school diploma, but I read a lot of books, and I think for anyone, if you're really interested in something, you find out how to get it done. But also, you mentioned that it was a time where synthesis was really happening and started to explode in a big way. But I think what was also happening at the time, and this is about 1975, was the first microcomputer chip that was affordable, Intel made. And there's actually an interesting book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers. I think it's 15, 20 years ago.
Yes.
He has an entire chapter about people who were born in 1955. For example, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Bill Joy, Eric Schmidt. It's a long list of others. And I happen to be born in 1955 too. And Gladwell's thesis is that if you were born in 55, then when the microcomputer revolution really took off in 1975, you were 20 years old. So you were old enough that you weren't in high school, but you weren't yet married and had children, so you could still take a risk. So it was the ideal time for those people to take risks. And so for the big guys, Jobs and Gates and all those guys, they were trying to make a home computer. For me, I was just trying to make a musical instrument that had a computer chip in it. That's the same thing that Dave Smith did and Tom Oppenheim did and many others at the time.
But you still saw yourself as more of a musician who was just kind of dabbling in tech initially. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think that's what my ego would have preferred. I would have preferred that I was this sort of creative artist, but
we all wanted to be the rock stars. Yeah,
I was one of many. There are two types of guitar players. There's the ones that they hear a great recording and they say, "I could have done that," and there's the other ones who say, "I didn't do that." And I was more of the first group. I didn't really have the true artist vision to be able to make a significant impact in music. But I found out, over time that my calling was really in making the musical instruments and not so much in making beautiful music.
Well, you made an interesting observation, though, about people born in that particular time, in that particular era, because there really is almost a split, almost a dichotomy between people who embraced technology in their early 20s and really kind of grew with it versus people who almost were willfully technologically ignorant.
Or they were just people that didn't need to learn those things yet. They needed to learn how to operate products. And so I was an early adopter because I just really loved the technology. I was a child of the 60s, and back then everything was about the future. And
Yes.
the future was still cool then. It didn't become uncool until Reagan got into office, in the 80s. And so I was excited about the future, and to this day I still am. I really always look forward. I don't really like to look back, and I think that's I attribute to that to the association between coolness and the future that existed when I was a young man.
I mean, it's kind of funny, I see nowadays a lot of people looking at what we thought the future would look like versus what it really looks like. Some of it was pretty prescient, but other aspects of it were.
Yeah, it was very different than what many people predicted. But it all balances out to somewhere in the middle. The things that people said that we would all have haven't happened yet, and the things that people said we wouldn't have happened much faster. A computer on every desk and things like that, and computer in your pocket.
Yeah, that's true. Now I have heard a little bit of the story from another mutual friend of ours, but I want to hear your take on it. Apparently, you were working with Leon Russell, and my version of the story that I already know comes from our friend Lenny Spent.
Yes, of course. I've known Lenny since we were teenagers.
I know. I think that's remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah. Her boyfriend at the time was a guy named Robert Fleischman, who was a singer. We were together in a band. And so we all knew each other. And Lenny's always had, of course, a great interest in technology, and of course became a recording engineer and recorded some Steely Dan's records and many others, Blondie. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Well, no, the way Lenise related a lot of it to me was that you were in certain ways, if not responsible, then at least a positive influence on her being able to get involved with working with Leon, working in the studio, and really kind of learning some of these things. You were part of the crowd who embraced her in that sense.
She was always a very curious, very intelligent person, and when I was doing recording engineer, and particularly working for Leon Russell, she asked me a lot about the engineering equipment, and which at the time was tape and Dolby noise reduction and big wired consoles with no computers in them.
Sure.
So it was an exciting thing, and she saw this as sort of her connection into this musical world, I think.
To me, that's always a really wonderful thing when you can have people like that who are a positive influence,
Oh yeah. And you mentioned that I worked for Leon Russell. Well, he was a great mentor for me. I started working with him when I was, I think, 18 or 19. And I sometimes like to say I went to the University of Leon Russell. He knew so much about music and about music production, songwriting, performance, and knew every musician. And so I worked for him. I was sort of a package deal. Although I did play guitar on his tours, it was really my attraction to him was that I did multiple things. I could engineer his records when we were in the studio. I knew all about technology and synthesizers, and so I could advise him on things to buy, and which I did very often, because usually whenever I wanted something, I would find a way to convince him he needed to buy it. And I lived with him at his house. And so I was able to just basically live in the studio at all the times when we weren't working. But I played good enough guitar that I could play the parts that far better guitar players had played on his recordings, but I didn't play. I wasn't good enough to play on his recordings.
I do remember that Leon Russell was extremely technical, very, very adept, great songwriter as well, but he really knew his way around the studio. He was a fixture in a lot of LA studios for many years, and he was definitely one of those guys that he came in and he knew exactly how to drive things. He knew his way around a console and really did understand a lot of the aspects of music production, not just as an arranger, which he was brilliant at also, but from
and
a
producer.
technical perspective as a producer, yeah, and as an engineer. And that's it's rare that you find somebody with that broad a range of talents.
He really thought in many ways without limits. He had, at the time when most people were doing 16 track recording on 2-inch tape, and some were doing and well, also 24 track. He had bought a machine from this company called Stevens Electronics that put 40 tracks on 2-inch tape, and he thought, why be limited to 16 or 24? Just put everything on there, and then you can decide in the mix what you want to use. So he really was very forward thinking in many ways. And he liked it so much, he bought two 40 track machines, one for his house in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and one for his house in LA. And because he needed noise reduction, he bought 2 racks of 40 Dolby A units, one for each studio.
Wow.
And so the problems are always sort of moving to the right. He also had a 40 track console from Automated Processes at the time, massive thing. And so all the problems in either the tape machine or in the Dolby's or in the console would just move over to the right. So channels sort of 37, 38, 39, 40 always had some problem with them, you know.
So is this a gradual attrition back down to 24 almost?
Well, let's say the console had a problem with the op amp on slider number channel 16. Well, you just swap it out, pull it out, move it over to 40, and move number 40 over, you know. So
funny. Gives whole new meaning to the term back 40.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your business, because you early on became, whether consciously or not, an entrepreneur at a pretty busy time for entrepreneurship in general, early 80s.
Well, yeah, I think there's this thing they call the Peter Principle, which I'm paraphrasing, but it means that we all eventually rise to our own personal level of incompetence.
Exactly. Yes.
And I think that's very, very common in the music products industry. Dave Smith, Tom Oberheim, Don Luca, we all started out because we wanted to make a cool thing. We thought we had an idea to do that. And then, of course, we became overrun with business stuff. And we thought, and I speak for myself, I thought, okay, I've got to get better at this business stuff. And ultimately, I discovered that I don't want to do that. I'm never going to be good at something I don't like. And so, for example, the way I run my business now is I have no employees, but I just have a lot of outside friends, engineers, website designers, and then outside manufacturing. I'll just turn the engineers and the designers on as needed. But otherwise, I just work at home, and then all manufacturing is subcontracted out to a local company here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And they do shipping from there as well. So it allows me to labor under the illusion that I'm not actually running a business.
Well, and it's in a way, it's sort of analogous to the music side of things. You know, do you want to be the creative artist who is coming up with the music and creating, or do you want to deal with the record label side and the business and all of that other stuff? Because it really is true that when you start actually having to master the business side of it, some people just are not necessarily attuned to that and don't really want to do that. And for them, it's almost a buzzkill. You know,
I would count myself among that group.
Yeah. Well, I would count myself among them as well. And it's interesting to see how we then adapt by saying, you know what, let's just bring in our circles of colleagues who can cover those other aspects that we don't like. And, you know, but yeah, you kind of went gangbusters and then ran into a lot of the vagaries of running a business.
Well, I was not good at running a business because I didn't know what I was doing, and I just hated it. I had 55 employees and a large facility and doing my own manufacturing, and I think one thing I've learned over the years is, well, first of all, is to find out what you really want to do and then spend your time doing that and adjust your expenses to fit the income that comes from that. But the other thing I learned is that in business, if I look back on it now, I'd say 90% of my time has been spent correcting in some way or another my own mistakes. And so I just try to make less mistakes now. Now, in this point, I'm 67 and I've got a lot of experience and I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. So I tend not to make as many stupid choices. And it works out pretty well. And at this point, it's very efficient. I do right now, actually about the same amount of business I was in my original company, but I have no employees. And I'm probably working half the time than I did back then because it's just efficient. Everything runs very smoothly.
Well, now let me ask you about the mistakes, and I don't want to dwell on them in that sense.
That's fine.
But I know that I think it was the 9000 that had all the software issues and everything, and ended up being
software
sort of
issues. It had hardware issues. It had mechanical issues. It was too expensive. And it was the dumbest thing I did was to cancel the previous product, the Linnstrument, which people still wanted. And I just assumed, well, why would they want the old one when the new one's so much cooler? Well, they'd want the old one because it's half or a third the price and doesn't do all the stuff that they don't need. They just wanted to make drum beats.
Well, and therein is your lesson in marketing. Speaking to your user base and all of that. And yeah, that sounds like hard lessons to learn. But were those issues that the 9000 had, for example, do you feel that those were poor decisions, or were they circumstantial? Really?
It was poor decisions. My guiding principle was what's cool to add in. And, some people don't want those features. Some people don't want something that big. Some people didn't want to do MIDI sequencing. They just wanted to program some drum beats. So it was just a whole lot of dumb decisions, really.
So you basically at some point made the decision that I love making stuff, but I don't want to run my own business. Was that hard for you to shut down the business in that sense?
I didn't shut it down. The business shut down itself. I ran out of money, and there were too many bills to pay. And so in 1986, Linn Electronics just shut its doors.
But was that
at
difficult?
that time? Yeah. Oh, it was a very difficult time for me because it was my ego identity. I thought,
that's what I'm thinking is, you had invested so much of yourself in it. You have to essentially face your users and say, well, we part ways here, essentially.
It was true, yeah. And at the time, everything was structured. Since I did my own manufacturing and all that sort of stuff, it's not the sort of thing that you can just start right up very quickly.
Sure.
It takes some investment, all that sort of stuff. And one thing I am glad in some ways I did is I never took any investment. I just bootstrapped the whole company up myself because I always wanted the choice. The trouble is that the business was running me, so I effectively didn't have choice anyway. But the good news is that after Linn Electronics went under, then Akai approached me, and they were just starting out, and we had a wonderful working relationship because I just got to do the design stuff and they did all the marketing, sales, finance, all that crap. And I just, I got a royalty for it. So it worked out very nicely.
Oh, that was a marriage made in heaven for you, I think. And in a way, I mean, that gave you, it seems like that gave you the venue you needed without all of the extra baggage.
Yeah, it was very good. And fortunately, the result of losing my first company is that I learned what it is I want to do and what I don't want to do. So it was very nice for me.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I really love is the fact that you have been able to nurture these kind of relationships, first with Akai, with M Audio, with all of these, with various parts of the industry. I think that's been it's the whole synergistic effect of, not only being able to use your own ideas, but then being able to bring those ideas to a team of people and, refine them. I think that's kind of cool.
Well, there were all these people who really had done some big things and had skills for building a business more than I did. So it's very humbling. This particular industry, you've got a lot of people musicians that don't have a lot of money, and so you have a lot of people who want to make products because they just love music, and so you've got a lot of supply, and a demand from people who don't have that much money. So it is a difficult business to be in, and so it's very humbling, and it made me really respect those who are doing a better job than I was. And you mentioned M Audio. Tim Ryan is a very, very sharp guy. By coincidence, I just emailed him. He lives in Paris now, and we were talking about things he's doing on a daily basis. He's a very nice guy. And there were a lot of people at the time, other synthesis people. I met Dave Smith, I met Tom Oberheim, and there was a certain competition at the time, I suppose. But at the same time, after a while, you recognize there are not that many people that have shared your own life path, and and it's important to have these people in your life as friends.
Oh, I think so. And especially, I love the fact that you've collaborated with all these people. I mean, this is it's like the equivalent of a super group, these technical meetings of the minds. I mean, I worked with the M Audio team for a long time. I know there were some brilliant people over there too. There have been so many wonderful people that you've been able to work with over the years. And I think that's just, it's got to have only improved everything that you put your stamp on in that sense.
Yes, yeah, it really has been, and it's just a great life enhancement too. As I say, if you're, we all pick people who have found, who have pursued the same path in life, and so to be friends with people who have done the same sort of thing it's very satisfying. The type of person you can talk to, and he can say, "Oh yeah, I know that one."
Yeah, it's true. I'd like to talk a little bit about your approach to musical instruments, because it's far from typical. You've come up with some very interesting user interfaces, and you've come up with some very interesting combinations of musical components.
Well, when I look around at the different products from companies, often I don't see so much design from their designers. I see them basically asking people, "What do you want?" And then they give them that. And so they put a button for this, button for that, a knob for that. But I see a lot of more and better. I see a lot of evolution and less revolution. So what I always try to do is I try to step back and put on my musician's hat and say, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? And is it, for example, if I want to make a better synthesizer, should I add more oscillators, more envelope generators, more filters, more LFOs? And I think, no, I would like, if I were to make a synthesizer, I'd say, what does a musician say to someone when he's trying to get a sound? He says, can you make something that's kind of like a violin, but has more of a sawtoothy sound or something like that? And I don't see much of that revolutionary design thinking going on in the synthesizers right now. It's just more and more better. People are just putting more effects, more oscillators, more all this sort of stuff. And so what I try to do is, for example, if I'm making a musical instrument, I sort of start and say, what if you could just put a little USB connector on the back of your neck and think the music and hear it, and everything else is an impediment. So how do you remove, you can't do that. So how do you have the least number of impediments between thinking the music and hearing it? And that's kind of a trick I use to break out of the more better and into the more revolutionary thought, at least what I would hope would be considered revolutionary thought.
That's interesting, because especially with your user interface designs, I mean, I think the first time I looked at the Linnstrument, I was a little baffled for a second until you explained it. And then it was like, oh, this is so painfully logical that I don't know why anybody didn't do it before. It's...
Well, in a sense, someone did do it before. And I would point to Lippold Hawken, who made the Continuum, and is still very popular.
Okay, sure.
starting in 1999. But he understood the idea that in this particular universe, we have 3 dimensions to control. So if you have a surface that allows you each touch to not just turn a switch on and off, but rather to control the pressure of your touch, the x-axis movement and the y-axis movement, and do that polyphonically per touch, you have the best chance of getting the wonderful expression of the acoustic instruments like guitars and wind instruments and bowed string instruments and it is and end up as you well, if someone's gone to my website, there's an essay on there where I talk about, because we've been playing music with on-off switches, for example, the switches of a MIDI keyboard, MIDI piano keyboard, that electronic music has become background music. For example, in popular music, there are no instrumental solos anymore. The synthesis players are just playing backgrounds for the singer. The singer is the solo voice. Music for picture, it's the picture is the foreground, the music, the synthesis is the background, and the last thing is music for dance. The DJ or the person who's doing electronics, rhythmic electronics, is providing a background for dance. And so my thinking is that the one solo instrument that's still in the foreground is the human voice. And so if I can get as close to the human voice in a electronic instrument, that's my goal. And I would like to say that I've done that with Linnstrument, and I think Lippold-Hawken has done it with the Continuum. I would say that Roland Lamb has done a very good job with the Rolly Seaboard, or Randy Jones with the sound plane. Many of these are instruments that people don't even know about because they just assume the only option is to play music with on-off switches.
That's true. And I think, when you point to the human voice or wind instruments, especially fretless bowed instruments, there's a lot of nuance there that I think is lost. And it's funny, I was talking with someone about this recently, the idea that even vocals now, especially with the popularity of auto-tune, a lot of singers now tend to sing straight, as opposed to blue notes and nuance and whatnot. They do that same thing of almost imitating auto-tune. And I think maybe a lot of that is due to the fact that we're playing a lot of on-off switches.
Yeah, it cleans everything up, so it becomes, sort of a robotic desired feature. That said, auto-tune is brilliant in the fact that it, when Antares first made it, in that if you use it correctly, it can just change, it can fix pitch. And there are some singers who are wonderfully expressive, and they're actors in a sense. They're playing a part, and they just might have a little bit of trouble occasionally with pitch. And auto-tune is very good about correcting that. And if you didn't have that, it would be much harder. So I think I like the idea that technology is enhancing our humanity as opposed to replacing it. And I think auto-tune was a very good design and a revolutionary design in the way that they implemented that right out of the gate.
Oh, absolutely. I think technology in general is a wonderful aspect of enhancing performances. But I also think that there is a downside to that when things get too simplistic. And, so you're a guitar player. When you sit down at the piano, you approach music much differently than you do when you pick up a guitar. Any kind of new interface is going to make you view your music differently, think differently, create different nuances. And I think that, to me, is why I love the idea of an alternative controller.
Well, the funny thing is, I got a guitar sitting right over here, but I never play it. I only play Linnstrument these days, and because I just find it to be a better musical instrument. It allows me to do more of the things I'm thinking of.
Yeah, I need to pick one up myself. I need to play with it a little bit more.
I'll give you a discount.
Yeah, I figured you might know a guy. Well, what's in the future for you?
Well, right now, what I'm really enjoying is just building up the Linnstrument community, and through every new free software update, add something. to it and makes it a more refined instrument. In the same way that a violinist might have a better bridge or a better wood for the top of the instrument. My equivalent electronic instrument is the software, or it could be some little tweak to the hardware inside. I mean, basically, the instrument has not changed that much. But there have been subtle improvements. I actually list them on my site. So if someone's buying something they can use, they know exactly what they're getting. And for example, they might get a new top panel that has some later printing on it, or they might get a playing surface that has a better nonstick coating on it. Those things are all on there. It's and the software is open source, so anybody can edit it however they want. But so I'm really enjoying at this point just building the Linnstrument community. There are over 4,100 Linnstrumentalists, as I call them, today.
I like that.
And I've actually
you
just
can
released,
do marketing.
Well, in a sense, in my own form. And I've just released the third in a series of compilations of user-submitted videos. And there are some extraordinary musicians playing Linnstrument at this point. So it's
Cool.
very nice to release these because a lot of people, the problem I have with Linnstrument that I always have myself trying to overcome is they look at it and say, oh, that has a grid of lit buttons. It must be a DJ controller. It must be on-off switches. And they sort of put it in this mental category of yet another cheap few $100 DJ controller or clip launcher that it just consists of a bunch of lit buttons. But it's a very, very different thing. And they'll say to me, how come yours is more expensive? Well, that's because it's not a DJ controller. It's a fine musical instrument. And it's sensitive to touch, and it captures 3 dimensions of continuous movement for each touch, and in a low latency and high speed, and on a large playing surface, which is very difficult to do technologically. So that's one of the things I have to overcome. The other thing is, as I say, because everyone's listening to music performed with on-off switches, they say, why would a musician need anything other than an on-off switch to play music? And so, it's hard. You need ideal examples. Commonly found in popular music, usually, to teach people that there's something that is needed. And currently, all those examples in popular music are just on-off switch music.
Well, I think you have to go back a little ways to, sometimes to pre-synthesis days, to show people certain nuances.
Well, I do that, and so for example, a lot of people that play Linnstrument will use some of the wonderful software synthesizers that reproduce the sound of acoustic instruments, like the wonderful SWAM instruments from audio modeling that do all wind instruments and bowed string instruments. That doesn't mean a thing to someone who grew up not listening to violins and wind instruments, or even guitars. Guitars aren't used anymore in popular music, so it doesn't move them emotionally. We all have emotional attachments to sounds. They're sense memories. And so if someone grew up hearing sounds like a Moog bass or sequences or drum machines, those are the things that move them emotionally. And so what I try to do is give examples when I do these compilation videos of sometimes people playing traditional sounds using physical modeled instruments or samples or something like that. And then some examples of people doing with pure synthesis and applying the skilled gestural control, but to synthesized sound. And so that helps to spread the word and for people to understand it who are only used to hearing synthesis. And I love synthesis.
Oh, of course, but you're able to broaden people's horizons a little bit, which is kind of
exactly.
Nice. Yeah. So let me ask you what I ask a lot of people when I'm speaking with them. You came up in a completely different era in terms of music, in terms of technology, in terms of the way we consume music now. You just alluded to that. What advice would you have for 15-year-old you coming up now?
I don't know, just keep your eyes open and keep your ears open and listen to be accepting of change because it seems to be happening at an accelerated rate. There are many, many different wonderful sources of the cutting edge of information in technology and music and all that. If you just look around, if you look for it on the web, and the wonderful thing is you can find it on the web. And there's so many changes going on in so many different areas. But the problem is that you're just inundated with information. But the opportunity is that you are more than ever before able to see the holes and what actually is where those holes are, and how they can how you can make a contribution that can change culture.
I like that. Good advice. Roger Linn, thank you for being my guest.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me into your series here.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.